I was sitting in a coffee shop the other day, and I was watching this young woman at the table next to me. She was scrolling through her phone, right? And I could sort of see bits of her screen. In maybe a minute, she saw like a celebrity divorce announcement, then this viral video, a puppy trying to get down some stairs, looked kind of stuck.
Oh, yeah.
And then, bam, a news alert. Grainy footage, looked like a war zone, a bombed-out building.
Wow, quite the mix.
Exactly. But what really struck me was her reaction, or, well, her lack of one. Her face didn't change. Her thumb just kept going, same steady rhythm, scroll, scroll.
Like muscle memory.
Totally. She liked the puppy video, but then just scrolled right past the divorce news, right past the rubble. A massive human tragedy and a tiny animal problem. Processed, judged, dismissed with the exact same flick of her finger.
And zero emotional cost, it sounds like.
Precisely zero. And that moment, it felt like a snapshot of right now. It wasn't that she was a bad person, not at all. She was just a modern person. And it got me thinking, in this age where we're flooded with information, have our hearts kind of built in a circuit breaker, to stop from overloading, have we gotten so used to performing care online that maybe we've forgotten the real feeling?
It's a really powerful observation.
So that's the mission for our deep dive today. We want to investigate the psychological stuff happening here. We're looking at the real cost of being connected all the time and asking, has our collective ability to truly empathize, to feel with someone, understand, respond, has it been kind of involuntarily shut down by just the sheer amount of difficult stuff we see every day?
Really is a profound conflict, and honestly, an incredibly urgent one. Yeah. This modern paradox, it's undeniable, isn't it? We have maximum connectivity. We can see suffering anywhere, instantly, but our emotional response seems to have flatlined.
Yeah, minimal response.
Minimal, exactly. And this isn't just about how you react to news headlines. When empathy starts to erode, the fallout is huge. It hits social cohesion, our personal mental health, and crucially, how we even teach compassion to the next generation. The research we've looked at really paints this picture of how the digital world can actively work against our basic human need for real connection and empathy.
Okay, let's try and unpack this. Starting with that core feeling, that involuntary reaction to the information age, the digital assault that leads to emotional overload. We're not just talking about feeling tired or burned out, though that's definitely part of it. This idea that constantly seeing global suffering wears us down. There's actually a clinical term for it, right?
Yep.
That's now being used for just, everyday people online. Compassion fatigue.
Exactly. Compassion fatigue isn't trivial. It's a serious clinical thing. Traditionally, you'd see it in professionals, nurses, first responders, therapists, people directly exposed to others' trauma day in, day out.
Right. Heavy stuff.
Heavy stuff. But now it describes the reality for the average digital consumer. It's this deep state of emotional exhaustion, feeling detached, and often this sense of diminished personal accomplishment. You feel helpless.
Helpless how?
Well, because the problems, war, climate change, famine, they feel massive, global, relentless. And you, personally, you can't fix them. That feeling of helplessness is absolutely central to the fatigue setting in.
I think everyone listening can probably relate to that feeling. That if I see one more awful story, I might just break, Drowning in trauma that isn't physically yours, but the emotional weight is absolutely real.
It is.
And this fatigue, it feeds right into this very modern behavior, one that got its name during the pandemic. Doomscrolling.
Doomscrolling is maybe the perfect symptom of that empathy circuit breaker tripping. We define it as the compulsive habit, right?
Yeah.
Continuously consuming negative, distressing news online.
Compulsive is the key word there.
It really is. Crucially, it's not just about staying informed to be a good citizen. It's the inability to stop looking for bad news, even when seeking it out makes you feel worse. It becomes a cycle reinforcing itself. It's like this frantic search for certainty in a world that feels totally uncertain.
It's that feeling, isn't it? You know it's bad for you. You know you should look away. But there's this thought, I have to see the next headline just to be prepared, even though the headlines are actually making you feel less prepared.
And the research backs this up. The effects go way beyond just a bad mood. Doom scrolling leads to measurable things. Impaired attention span, you get more irritable, serious sleep problems.
Sleep, yeah, I can see that.
Definitely. And long term. This compulsive habit is a clear contributor to things like generalized anxiety disorder and depression. It cultivates this deep sense of learned helplessness. The less control you feel you have, the more you scroll, and the more distressed the scrolling makes you. The world feels chaotic, and scrolling is this flawed attempt to impose some kind of order.
Okay, so when we hit that wall, that feeling of just numb, debilitating numbness, is that just exhaustion, or is it something deeper, like an involuntary defense?
It's absolutely the body's ancient primal stress response kicking in, but it's being applied to the digital world. Fight, flight, or freeze. Numbness is the freeze response.
That's freeze, okay.
It's your body protecting itself when a situation feels overwhelmingly traumatic. Doesn't matter if the trauma is right in front of you, physical, or if you're seeing it remotely on a tiny screen in an endless feed.
So my brain is basically deciding, like on an unconscious level, nope, can't handle this much terror or despair, shutting down feelings to survive.
Precisely. And this psychological numbness, it exists on a spectrum. On the milder end, you get apathy, indifference, just not feeling much like the woman you saw in the coffee shop.
Right.
But it can stretch to much more severe responses. Things like dissociation, where reality feels distant or unreal, heavy lethargy, even symptoms that look a lot like severe depression. For many people, it's become a kind of collective, involuntary shutdown in the face of constant global crisis.
Which brings us to the brain itself, the actual physical loop that makes this scrolling feel so addictive, so compulsive. Why would our brain reward us for finding more bad news? That feels backward evolutionarily.
Yeah, it does seem counterintuitive, but the neuropsychology explains the paradox. So the initial distress, seeing that awful headline or shocking image, it triggers the amygdala. That's our brain's fear and threat detector.
Okay, so alarm bells go off.
Big time. Anxiety spikes. And what does the user do? They scroll immediately, almost desperately, looking for more information to try and reduce that uncertainty. And that the search for novelty and the temporary feeling of reducing uncertainty, that's the highly addictive part.
So it's the seeking, not the finding.
Exactly. This whole cycle gets powerfully reinforced by the dopaminergic system. That's what governs pleasure and reward seeking. It rewards the act of seeking new information, even if the info itself is negative. Your brain sees scrolling as an action that might lead to a solution or some control, and it's that attempt that gets the dopamine hit, not the actual content you find. And here's the critical part. Under this constant stress, this information overload, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thought, judgment, planning, it gets compromised. It's overwhelmed.
So you lose the ability to just rationally decide, okay, enough scrolling, time to stop.
Pretty much. Your rational brain gets sidelined by the fear response and the reward loop.
So our brain's survival architecture is essentially being hijacked by digital architecture that's designed purely for engagement. And we see the results of this collective shutdown in broader societal trends, don't we?
We absolutely do. This collective numbness manifests in coping mechanisms we usually associate with trauma survivors, but now on a massive scale. Just look at the rates of epidemic substance misuse, the reliance on things like food, sex, or entertainment addiction just to self-soothe, and the pervasive, almost required media overuse.
It's like the whole population is showing symptoms.
Symptoms of emotional overload and, yeah, kind of generalized emotional dissociation.
So if the sheer volume of information is the core problem, then the solution has to involve managing the input, right? We need deliberate strategies. Things maybe only professionals used to need, but now are essential for everyone online. How do we set boundaries in this nonstop digital storm?
Yeah, digital well-being now requires specific, intentional, and often quite rigorous self-management.
Right.
You have to actively curate your input. You have to view the internet not as just a passive reflection of reality, but as this powerful lever that you need to control carefully.
What does that look like practically?
It means setting specific, non-negotiable boundaries for news consumption. Maybe limiting social media apps or setting fixed time, say twice a day, to check for updates, and that's it.
I really like the idea some people talk about, periodic news fasts.
News fasts are crucial. They give your nervous system a genuine chance to relax, to reset its baseline anxiety level. Other things, practicing self-care that actually replenishes your emotional reserves, getting outside, physical activity, real community connection, mindfulness practices.
Things that aren't screens.
Things that aren't screens. The immediate, intense connection social media seems to offer, while it feels satisfying for a second, leads straight back to emotional exhaustion if you don't have those firm boundaries in place.
Okay. So, on one hand, we've got people passively overwhelmed by the sheer amount of suffering, which pushes them into numbness. But we also have to acknowledge the system isn't neutral, is it? It seems to actively reward engaging with toxic, antagonistic stuff. It's not just the volume tiring us out, it's the structure itself that seems engineered to make us angry. Which brings us to the architects of division.
Right. It's one thing to feel worn out. It's another thing entirely to realize the digital infrastructure might be specifically designed to make us more hostile and divided. Let's talk about algorithmic manipulation.
There's widespread concern, definitely. And now there's solid empirical evidence showing that social media feed ranking algorithms do exacerbate political polarization. Makes sense, right? These algorithms are designed to maximize user engagement.
Keep you scrolling, keep you clicking. Exactly. And across pretty much all platforms, what drives incredible engagement, outrage, moral condemnation, hostility. Those emotions keep users glued to the screen, and that's the algorithm's main job.
We have some data from a really important field experiment that used large language models, AI, to actually test this manipulation directly. What did they find when they started tweaking the kind of content people saw?
So the researchers experimented by either increasing or decreasing people's exposure to what they called anti-democratic attitudes and partisan animosity. Let's call it APA, basically hostile, divisive political content.
Okay.
The results were immediate and, frankly, quite striking in their implications. When APA exposure was significantly decreased in participants' feeds, so they saw less hostile, divisive stuff, those individuals showed a rapid, measurable increase in positive feelings towards the opposing political group, the out party.
Wait, hang on. That's huge. You didn't even have to, teach them empathy or run workshops. You just had to stop feeding them the negativity, and their natural inclination towards connection started to return almost instantly.
Almost instantly. Precisely. And conversely, when APA exposure was increased, when they deliberately showed people more hostile content, negative feelings towards the out party and strong negative emotions, specifically sadness and anger, spiked immediately.
Wow. So that's basically proof. A simple mechanical change in how the algorithm presents information can instantly dial polarization and negative feelings up or down. The machines are making us angrier by design because anger drives profitable engagement.
That's what the data strongly suggests. It forces us to ask a tough question, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What is the moral responsibility of the people designing these platforms if they apparently could just turn down the volume on hatred and polarization, but choose not to? It points to a clear, pretty straightforward path for platforms to actually reduce effective polarization. They would specifically target and downrank content that undermines shared democratic values. The data suggests that just reducing exposure to hostility might be the single most effective thing they could do against digital division. The architecture we live in right now seems built to prioritize the performance of outrage over genuine human connection.
In this high outrage environment, it plays directly into our deepest psychological needs, particularly that fundamental evolutionary drive for group belonging. This is where the psychology of us versus them really kicks in, rooted in social identity theory.
Absolutely. Social identity theory basically says that a big chunk of how we see ourselves comes from the groups we feel we belong to.
Our tribe.
Our tribe, exactly. Group identity gives us security, validation, a sense of shared purpose. But in the digital world, often anonymous, super fast-paced, this need for security just magnifies ideological fights and tribalism like crazy. So when someone challenges your group's beliefs or values online, it's instantly felt not just as an intellectual disagreement, but as a personal, almost existential threat. And that triggers highly defensive behavior, rapid demonization of the other side.
The digital echo chamber makes this worse, too. We tend to sort ourselves into these ideological silos, right? We avoid real conversations with opposing groups because we're afraid of being attacked or shamed publicly, and that just intensifies the ideological purity within our own group.
And that silo mentality gets deeply reinforced by some predictable cognitive biases. Understanding these biases is really key to figuring out why digital debates feel so intractable, so impossible sometimes.
Okay, what are the main ones?
Well, first, you've got confirmation bias. This is simply our tendency to look for, interpret, favor, and remember information that confirms what we already believe.
We like being right.
We love being right. And algorithms already filter content for us based on engagement, but our own behavior reinforces this. We click on stuff we agree with. This creates those ideological echo chambers, which can lead to what some call epistemological closure, meaning you become profoundly resistant to any evidence that contradicts your views. You actively seek out confirmation, and the platform happily serves it up, creating this customized reality just for you.
So it's not just that we ignore challenging evidence. We might stop even seeing it as valid information in the first place. Okay, what about how we judge other people's motives online?
That brings us to the second big one, the fundamental attribution error. This is super visible in online political fights. It's where we explain our opponent's negative actions by blaming their inherent character. They must be dishonest or immoral or just plain stupid.
Instead of the situation?
Exactly. Yeah. We don't consider situational factors that might be influencing their behavior. Think about it. When I'm rude online, it's because I'm having a bad day or I feel provoked. When they're rude, it's because they are fundamentally bad people.
Right. We blame their character, but excuse our behavior based on the context. What's the third bias driving group conflict?
In-group bias. This is that deep-seated human tendency to favor, defend, and trust people in our own group, while being skeptical, suspicious, or even hostile towards outsiders. Social identity theory fuels this massively. This bias leads directly to stereotyping and, in extreme cases, the dehumanization of the opposing group, seeing them as less human, less intelligent, less ethical than us.
Which, of course, makes cruelty seem more justifiable.
Yeah.
Okay, and the final bias, the one that fuels that certainty, that self-righteousness we see so much of online.
That's the false consensus effect. This is our tendency to overestimate how many other people actually share our specific beliefs, behaviors, and attitudes.
Everyone thinks like me.
Pretty much. And in digital communities, this effect gets turbocharged because we hang out in these very specific ideological corners. It makes people believe their niche, maybe even extreme or aggressive views, are way more mainstream than they really are. This fuels self-righteousness and justifies hostility towards the obviously wrong minority viewpoints they encounter.
So all this manufactured hostility, these biases, it leads us straight to online trolling, which isn't always just random chaos, is it? There's often a psychological, even a kind of twisted moral root in this idea of deservingness.
Yeah, trolling is defined by being deceptive, destructive, disruptive.
Yeah.
Often with no clear goal other than just causing trouble. But the rationale, the justification trolls often give themselves, is this deeply held belief that their target deserves the punishment or humiliation they're dishing out.
They see themselves as vigilantes.
Kind of. Digital vigilantes, maybe. Yeah. They frame their actions as necessary moral corrections. They're cleaning up the internet in their view.
They genuinely feel righteous while being harmful.
Exactly. That rationalization lets them bypass guilt. And critically, a key emotional driver here is Schadenfreude.
Pleasure in someone else's misfortune.
Precisely. Taking pleasure specifically from others' suffering. And often, that pleasure is a stronger motivator than any real concern for justice. You see this clearly in some aspects of cancel culture. The act of collective condemnation can definitely strengthen the bonds within the attacking group, but it also dangerously entrenches those ideological silos by focusing on punishment instead of, say, dialogue or understanding.
The research we looked at provides a really striking, almost disturbingly clear psychological profile of the kind of person most likely to become this sort of online aggressor. The stats are incredibly sharp.
They really are. One study found that a combination of specific personality traits explained a shocking 53% of the variance in trolling behavior. Basically, over half the reason someone trolls comes down to these traits.
And what are they?
The four strongest predictors were high narcissism, low agreeableness, low openness, meaning resistant to new ideas or perspectives, and low self-esteem.
Okay, that specific mix jumps right out. High narcissism and low self-esteem. That feels like a contradiction. How do those two work together to fuel online aggression?
It often points towards something psychologists call vulnerable narcissism. See, there are broadly two types. Grandiose narcissism, think overt arrogance, confidence. But then there's vulnerable narcissism. That's marked by defensiveness, resentment, deep-seated feelings of inadequacy, often hidden behind a mask of superficial arrogance.
And that profile fits the online behavior.
Perfectly. The high narcissism and low agreeableness, those link directly to being manipulative and aggressive. These individuals often score high on measures of sadism, actually enjoying causing suffering. And the dark triad traits like Machiavellianism and psychopathy, which means low empathy, manipulative tendencies, wanting dominance. They crave validation, but react incredibly aggressively to any criticism because their fragile self-esteem just can't handle it. The low self-esteem link is key. It suggests trolling acts as a powerful compensatory mechanism. It's a way to cope with those deep feelings of inadequacy. They get a temporary hit of power and dominance by tearing others down online.
And the research also found that those same traits, the high narcissism, low openness, low self-esteem, they also predicted negative social media consequences for the trolls themselves. They explained 43% of that variance.
Exactly. So they're creating hostility, but they're also experiencing hostility in return, largely because of their own manipulative strategies and their dependence on digital validation.
They're trapped in a cycle.
A vicious feedback loop.
Sure.
Their personality drives the aggression. The aggression leads to conflict. The conflict reinforces their feelings of being victimized or inadequate, which then fuels more aggression. And the platform, it often rewards this entire loop because conflict generates massive engagement.
Before we move on from this section, there was one really interesting political finding related to deservingness that didn't quite fit the usual partisan anger narrative.
Yes, that was fascinating. The study on deservingness looked at who people think deserves certain outcomes, and it found this unique ideological difference. Conservatives were significantly more likely than liberals to say that individuals who received unearned honors or rewards were actually highly deserving of them.
Okay, that seems odd. Wouldn't a group often associated with meritocracy, earning your rewards, be less accepting of unearned success?
You'd think so, but this aligns really well with something called system justification theory, or SJT. SJT suggests that people are generally motivated to defend and see existing social, economic, and political systems as legitimate and fair.
Even if they aren't always.
Even if they aren't always fair to everyone, yeah. For individuals with a more conservative worldview, maintaining faith in the system's overall order and stability is often paramount. So they might view unearned success or accepting existing hierarchies not as unfair, but as a sign the system is working correctly, that it values things like social order or loyalty, even if strict meritocracy gets bent a little.
Okay.
Liberals, on the other hand, tend to place a stronger emphasis on fairness, equality, and pure meritocracy. So they're naturally more critical of unearned rewards because those rewards directly challenge their core principles about how resources should be allocated impartially. It just shows how deeply our underlying political beliefs shape even our most basic ideas about justice and who deserves what.
This really highlights how the digital age targets and, frankly, weaponizes our adult psychological drivers, our need for certainty, our craving for group belonging, those vulnerabilities tied to low self-esteem. But to really understand why these traits exist in the first place, why someone might develop into a person prone to vulnerable narcissism, for instance, we have to rewind. We have to look at the very beginning of the empathy circuit, childhood.
Yeah, if we genuinely want to tackle the divisiveness and the low empathy we see playing out in the adult digital world, we absolutely have to go back to the foundational environment, the family. It's the first microsystem, isn't it?
Yeah.
The critical crucible where empathy, that ability to feel, understand, and then respond appropriately to others' emotions is first shaped.
And the research here seems really clear, very robust. There's a well-established typology of parenting styles and how they directly impact empathy levels in kids. Let's maybe walk through those findings, starting with the style that seems to best cultivate compassion.
Right. That would be the authoritative style. This is defined by being highly responsive to the child's needs while also having reasonable, consistent demands and expressing lots of emotional warmth.
High warmth, high structure.
Exactly. And this style is consistently linked to the highest levels of empathy and emotional literacy in children. Why? Because these parents model emotional regulation themselves. They validate the child's feelings. I see you're feeling angry right now. But they also use reasoning and clear expectations when setting limits, but it's not okay to hit. They actively teach children how to feel and how to respond in pro-social ways.
So it's that balance, love, validation, and structure that builds real compassion, not just forcing compliance. Okay, what about the style that focuses purely on structure and control without much warmth?
That's the authoritarian style. High demands, strict rules, but limited warmth or responsiveness. This often leads to emotional suppression in children, sometimes even hostility. Because open emotional expression is discouraged or maybe even punished, kids struggle to recognize and label their own feelings.
Which makes it hard to recognize feelings in others.
Exactly. It directly hinders their ability to feel empathy for others. They might react with avoidance or even aggression when faced with strong emotions in peers because they were never taught how to navigate those feelings safely themselves.
Okay. And the opposite end. High warmth, but basically zero structure. The very hands-off, permissive style.
Permissive parenting tends to result in moderate empathy scores, but often with a significant downside. The emotional sensitivity might be there because of all the warmth and acceptance, but the lack of boundaries and consistent discipline means these kids often struggle with self-regulation.
So they feel it, but can't manage it.
Right. They might be highly sensitive to seeing someone else suffer, but they lack the impulse control or maybe the sense of social responsibility needed to actually act on that empathy effectively or constructively.
And finally, the style that seems to cause the most psychological harm overall.
That's neglectful parenting, marked by low responsiveness, minimal involvement, just not being there emotionally or physically, this has the most detrimental effect on a child's entire emotional development. It's strongly associated with profound emotional detachment, very low empathy scores, and a significantly higher likelihood of developing antisocial behaviors later on.
Why is it so damaging?
Because these children are essentially denied the fundamental building blocks of empathy. Things like secure attachment, experiencing emotional back and forth, consistent validation. These are learned through interaction. Without those foundational interpersonal experiences, an emotional void is created.
So the family sets the stage, but kids don't stay just in the family unit. As they grow, peer relationships become incredibly important, acting as a bridge, right? Mediating how that early empathy actually develops out in the world.
Absolutely. There's a key study on college students that really demonstrated this mediating role clearly. It connects the dots between home life and how emotionally competent someone becomes as a young adult.
What did it find specifically?
It found that emotional warmth in parenting, that authoritative style component, positively predicts a child's ability to form good, healthy peer relationships. And crucially, those positive peer relationships, in turn, significantly enhance empathy levels. It basically confirms that the good stuff learned at home, trust, warmth, understanding others' perspectives, gets practiced and solidified in social settings with friends.
And the negative parenting styles presumably carry forward and impact peer relationships negatively, too.
They do, in very predictable ways. Rejection parenting, where parents ignore a child's emotional needs or are frequently critical, maybe humiliating that, negatively predicts both peer relationship quality and empathy. The individual often ends up quite self-centered, defensive, struggles to build trust and functional relationships because they never learned how.
Makes sense.
And then there's overprotection, the helicopter parent, essentially, stunting a child's autonomous development by shielding them from every challenge. This also negatively predicts successful peer relationships. Why? Because when these individuals finally leave the heavily managed home environment, they often lack the coping skills and resilience needed for the real world, leading to conflict, anxiety, and difficulty navigating social situations independently.
Beyond the family and peer dynamics, modern childhood is just profoundly shaped by media. Screens are everywhere. Media acts as this huge socialization agent working through social learning theory, right? Where kids essentially model the behaviors and emotional responses they see.
Yes, and this is increasingly central to development, acting as both a potential risk and a potential reward. On the positive side, pro-social media. Content that depicts kindness, sharing, cooperation, peaceful conflict resolution research shows this clearly enhances empathic understanding and encourages pro-social behavior in kids.
Just watching it helps.
It helps, but the effect is maximized when parents actively mediate. That means co-viewing the content with the child, talking about the moral lessons, helping them understand why that kind of behavior was important or how the character felt. This active discussion is critical for turning passive viewing into internalized understanding and practice.
So it's not just what they watch, but the conversations you have about what they watch.
Precisely. And the downside is equally clear, maybe even more concerning. Violent media. Repeated exposure to violent content is consistently associated with emotional desensitization, basically, getting numb to seeing suffering and measurably reduced empathic responsiveness. It literally dulls the brain's natural response to seeing pain or distress in others.
And that effect is worse if they watch it alone.
Much worse. The effect is most severe when consumed without parental supervision or discussion. The child is left to interpret the violence, which often models solving conflict through force as normal, acceptable, or even desirable social behavior.
So we can kind of picture the ideal scenario versus the most worrying one based on this.
Exactly. The research points to this dark synergy, a kind of dual risk factor. The kids with the highest empathy scores, they tend to come from homes with authoritative parents, and they engage with pro-social media with parental guidance. That's the best combo.
And the lowest scores.
The lowest empathy scores tragically come from the worst combination. Neglectful homes combined with unsupervised consumption of violent media. The neglect creates the psychological void, and the violent media fills that void with models of aggression, desensitization, and low empathy. The environment and the content essentially conspire against the child developing emotional intelligence.
It brings the whole conversation full circle, doesn't it? The foundational issues we see in childhood, the emotional deficits from neglect or overly harsh environments, the desensitization from violent media, these might very well be the precursors. These children could grow into the adults with that combination of low self-esteem and low openness, who are then profiled as the ones most likely to become the aggressive, antagonistic trolls thriving on the divisive digital platforms we talked about earlier. Hashtag V. Conclusion and provocative thought. We've really traced a powerful and honestly quite disheartening path today. We started with that involuntary emotional numbness, the shutdown that comes from just being overwhelmed by the constant stream of global suffering, what we call doomscrolling and compassion fatigue, a kind of survival mechanism.
The freeze response.
Right. Then we moved into analyzing the psychological profile of those who actively inflict suffering online, the trolls, driven by that volatile mix of high narcissism and low self-esteem. Their aggression isn't random, it's often rationalized, and importantly, it's monetized by algorithms that profit from outrage.
Yeah, the system rewards it.
And finally, we grounded it all by looking at the fundamental roots of empathy itself, showing how it's directly shaped or damaged by parenting styles and media exposure right from our earliest years.
The central tension of our time really comes into focus, doesn't it? The digital age seems to perfectly weaponize our deepest psychological drivers, that need for certainty, the desire for group belonging, those raw vulnerabilities linked to low self-esteem. And it monetizes all of it through algorithms designed explicitly to prioritize division and outrage.
It explains so much.
It explains why the modern individual feels so constantly agitated, maybe anxious, and yet paradoxically so emotionally disconnected or numb. The very environment we inhabit feels profoundly hostile to the slow, difficult, sometimes messy, genuinely human work that real compassion requires.
So it feels like the real struggle now in this era isn't just about staying informed anymore. Maybe the deeper struggle is ensuring that the digital architecture we live inside doesn't just keep rewarding the performance of outrage and hostility while simultaneously undermining the actual hard human effort needed for genuine compassion. Yeah.
We're navigating this entirely new kind of social fabric, one where our basic psychological reward systems that drive for validation, that attempt to reduce uncertainty by scrolling, seem perfectly aligned with the very forces that isolate us, polarize us, and basically force that empathy circuit breaker to trip, probably every single day.